Hello, everyone. I am Scott Brinker of Chief Martech, joined by my collaborator,
Frans Riemersma from Martech Tribe, and we're really happy to have you here on Martech Day. Scott, happy Martech Day.
Oh, fantastic. This is the third year we've done this, as part of a worldwide celebration of the Martech industry and all the amazing professionals, at vendors, at brands, consultants, all helping out with Martech and marketing operations.
And it's so great. There are quite a lot of people approaching us saying, oh, actually, do you know whether marketing ops team or Martech team, we're going to take a day off together or team building day or whatever to celebrate Martech Day. So if you have any pictures, cliffhanging, send them over.
And any day that the marketing ops team actually gets a day off is truly a worldwide celebration. Well, listen, speaking of celebration, we want to start by giving a huge thank you to the sponsors who make this possible. Frans and I invest a tremendous amount of time every year in maintaining the Martech landscape, all the research we do around it, with quite a talented team that helps us out. And it's sponsors such as the 5 sponsors for today's event: Growth Loop, MoEngage, SaaS, Syncery, and WordPress VIP, who actually make it possible for us to do this research and provide it to you at no cost. We also want to give a huge thank you, shout out to Goldcast, the amazing events platform that we're all using here today. And also a thank you to G2 and Clearbit, who help provide us data in the analysis of the Martech landscape. So, well, I guess, Frans, right? The other big thank you is to all of our wonderful audience members here. Thank you for being a part of the Martech Day adventure.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's amazing to see how many people shared our last report, sharing all the love generously. Look at all these posts here. I mean, those are having custom images, PDFs, and what have you, bullet points, long text. So it's not just like, oh, nice, I like it. No, it's really in-depth analysis. And we like that. That feeds us back information, what it is you like, you want to see, you want to hear more about, and that inspired us for creating a new report we're going to release today.
Yeah, so Martech for 2024 gave a preview of trends we saw coming into this year, and the report that we are releasing today, and that Frans and I will be walking through some of the key findings of, is the state of Martech 2024, now that we're actually 5 months into it. And today we'll be covering, of course, the 2024 Martech landscape, a deep dive on the Martech Composability survey that we ran, and thank you to many of you who participated in it, and then sharing some cutting-edge research that Frans has been leading here on Martech stacks and business value. So I guess clock's ticking. Take it away, my friend.
Yes, here we go. Every year we are releasing the new Martech landscape, and it's a collision of consolidation and anti-consolidation forces. Let's dive deeper into that, because what we all want to know is, what is the new number? Did we shrink? Did we grow? And honestly, we don't care so much. It's just telling us where the market is going. That is what we really want to know. So we thought this time, without sharing the number straight away, we want to share with you how we got to the new number, because then you really understand, for instance, the impact of AI. What the first big mind-blowing surprise was, is that we got a pay dirt pile of 12,000 tools. I mean, that is more new candidate tools that we had to validate than the entire Martech landscape of last year. Normally, that was only 50% at most. Now it was like 100-something%. It's crazy. So, and don't feel pity if you're asked, we drink our own champagne. So we have been using machine learning algorithms to sift through all the pay dirt and try to figure out what tools should be in there and what not. But trust us, we don't leave it only to the machines. Yes, we love technology, but we don't always trust the outcome. So we always validate with humans, experts. We'll come to that in a second. But what was really interesting is the high impact of AI. In general, GenAI, so 2,300 tools are new, added, have a proposition, a pricing plan, a product, and maybe even a new company around it. And 800 of those, 850 to be exact, are GPT based. And you all know GPT is a part of the OpenAI platform where you can build your own GPT. And they encapsulated that into an offering, into a product, maybe even a company, and offer that. So that's a crazy, crazy number. But what we left out was even more that should or could go into the landscape. So 3,000 tools or GPTs we did not include. Why? Because they don't have a pricing plan, but that doesn't mean that they're not interesting and not helpful. It just shows there's so many tiny, plugins or GPTs that you could still use. So bear in mind, we'll delve into that later in a few slides from here. We added 700 new MarTech tools, and we disqualified a lot because they were fintech or edutech, or they were agencies or blogs or what have you. So that's the real work we've done. But now there's another mind-blowing surprise. And that is the question of, okay, this is all new, but how many dropped off? And it was really jaw-dropping number to us. It was so staggering that we went like, oh boy, what is happening here? And the number is, and I hope you're sitting down, 263 only. It's just 2%. And that we have not seen before, Scott. It was like last year, 7%. And
yeah.
whoa.
No, this is, we have never seen so little churn. And what's particularly surprising about that is 2023 was a hard year for the SaaS industry. I mean, it was a hard year for a lot of industries, but, particularly for SaaS. And a lot of people predicted that by the end of 2023, we'd actually see a tremendous amount of exits from the MarTech industry. That didn't happen. And again, that doesn't mean that might not happen at some point in time, but certainly within this window, these SaaS companies proved to be pretty resilient.
Exactly. And we also spoke about it that maybe the cost of software may be very low, to build and maybe to maintain. And that is a reason that they are on the back burner maybe for a while and then drop off. But there are no big, shakeout or acquisitions happening so much that it's an earthquake happening. So it's a low number. And now we can do all the math. We see 3,068 net new tools on top of the 11,000 we have already. So if you want to do the calculations, we're not doing it here. We're creating a selfie moment for you. There you go. 14,106, a crazy number. And we left out the 3,000 GPTs.
I know. We'll get to that in a moment too. That's kind of amazing. But yeah, 14,106. Would never have imagined this 13 years ago.
And the question is now, indeed, is it accelerating the growth or slowing down? Well, here you go. These are the numbers, and you've been keeping track of this for the past 13 years in a row. If I look at this, it's a crazy number where we are now. It's the steepest growth so far.
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to go back to like 2015, 2016, where, the landscape was actually like doubling, at a rate, to even see something like this. But what's fascinating is, just the absolute number of tools added in this past year. It's like if you added up all the tool counts we had from like 2011 through like up into 2016 almost, it's like that amount in like 1 year. And this was one of the first years we actually went back and we calculated the compound annual growth rate for the entire MarTech industry over this period. And it's crazy. I mean, if you average it out year over year, it's 41.8% CAGR, compound annual growth rate. And then if you're just looking for the number, what was the total growth from like the beginning to the end? 9,304%. Everyone says, marketing has changed tremendously over this past decade plus. Well, we'd humbly submit to you that the MarTech landscape is one artifact, one reflection of that change. You can quantify marketing's changed probably by about 9,304%.
It's a crazy number. This is just the count, of tools, not even the revenue or the amount of employees that are working in this space. It's a huge number, and we're happy to tell you that it's live on MarTech Map right now. If you didn't sign up for free. You can filter, search, sort, and find a lot of tools. And very important to stress, we started, validating tools just to understand better what's happening in the MarTech space. It's basically like a crash course in MarTech. So I would recommend just go in Martech map, find 10 tools, just filter and you'll find 10 tools and then click on those. It's the quickest way to get a grip and an understanding of what Martech is happening. If you're doing a software selection, just look at what others are offering and you'll find what is commoditized or not. This is the feedback, by the way, we get from all the people helping us with validating all the time. And there are many of those. So we have 467 contributors over the years. Thank you all. By the way, if you download this presentation as PDF, you can click on those logos and headshots and say thank you to all these people. It's a great number. So next to the release of the new Martech Super Graphic, we have the Super Gratitude Graphic 2024. Thank you all and keep it coming. Please, please, please. It's so great.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And now some of the insights. What we see is a landslide happening in the cases of where's the dominance, in terms of how many tools are provided from one continent like Europe or USA. We can do more in Asia, Asia Pacific. So if you want more research, but just a highlight here. And we see that in some areas, there was a shift towards Europe. And in other cases, there's a shift towards the United States. And look at, for instance, the red ones here, especially in the orange section. I'm talking about video marketing and content marketing. It moved from Europe, which was a stronghold for content, and is moving towards the USA. That is interesting. And it has to do with GenAI, because that's all mostly built or inspired by ChatGPT and by DALL-E and what have you. So that is a great move and insight that we have from this research. And we all know that content, writing content, creating images, creating videos is the largest percentage where GenAI use cases are applied. But we learn and we see there's so much more, because that's only 50% of the story. The other half is covered by social relationships, commerce and sales, data, and there's some very underlying exciting things happening. Look at this one. We peeled it off and looked at the subcategories. So yes, there's a lot of orange, which is content. There's also green, pretty high ranking in the top 14 GenAI-based tools in Martech. And they have exciting use cases, like, for instance, lead sourcing and lead scoring and pitch generation or support. If you look in the data space, there's exciting GenAI stuff happening with storage and unification of data and interpretation, chat with data, talk to your data in plain English, they say. With a chat interface, it's crazy. And then you have your data sourcing, extraction, just in the content space. So we leave out now the green, the blue, and the rest. Just in the content space, MKT1 did a very interesting research. They surveyed what is it you're testing already within content and product marketing space. Now you see that some of the cases are tried and tested and very useful, and they use it on a daily, weekly basis or a monthly basis, but also tried and stopped. So you can learn from this. And the last column is also very impressive, where it says, we never tried it. We didn't have the time yet or the use case yet. We didn't apply. So I would suggest, as a tip, use this structure as a backlog for GenAI testing and experimentation. I mean, marketing is all about learning, experimentation, growth hacking. So give it a try and maybe include the sales enablement, the data GenAI applications that we showed earlier. That is very exciting. And keep us posted, of course. Now, we promised to come back to the GPTs. This is a universe in itself. So we thought it's worthwhile diving a level deeper, and we found that there are many areas where you have both a proposition, where you have a GPT, but also areas where you have GPT standalone. So it's GPT, and they didn't wrap it into a bigger product. They didn't wrap it in an own domain name with a pricing page or what have you. Now, we're not saying that will never happen, but it might happen. But these are more smaller applications or atoms that you can use in your stack. Whereas the white section down below, you see that they included GPTs in a bigger proposition. Look at CMS, for instance. There's quite a lot of tools that now say prompt your website into existence. How cool is that? And apparently it's so cool that you need a proposition, you need to pay for it. we will see where this is going. This is our own backlog. We're tracing, and trying to find out where it's going and where it's headed. And if we talk about GPTs, we didn't include these. There's much more we don't include because of not having a full proposition. And maybe we should create, Scott, next year a separate one or a different, but this is a very volatile area. So we added here Google Apps, where you have the add-ons, like in Google Sheets or Google Docs. We added the Microsoft App Store. We added AWS Marketplace. There's so many small tools and plugins and add-ons in there that, it's not unfair to say that maybe in the future there will be a one-person company making $1 billion. And we've seen it already with Instagram, 12 people, or WhatsApp, 50 people. So it's not unlikely. And it's not just Sam Altman from OpenAI saying this. It's also the Singularity University propagating this, that you have a massive transformative purpose. You achieve that with the low-cost software, and there you go.
Well, I'm so happy to hear that, marketing technology is not going to be slowing down anytime soon.
We'll have more of this, Scott. And I think we spoke about that before, and we even collected some data around that. So you created this typification of what type of long-tail, torso, and head companies do you have out there. So we see more hobby horses, service software, and I think that's growing and growing. And I think the dynamics that we see is that on the right-hand side of the dotted line, there will be the add-ons, the plugins, and what have you. And we see that this number is pretty steady over the years. The next slide and the next graph is really telling the story. Time and time again, we hear about consolidation. We spoke about consolidation, non-consolidation forces. We don't see the head and the torso shrink, and we don't see the tail grow. It's a continuous thing, but it's not static. So we believe, and I think we need and want to do some more research, that in the yellow area, and we've added the number for 2023 here, in this area, you see that probably there are more tools coming up there, hobby horses, maybe to be included into the bigger ones, but then new tools emerge. So it's a constant flux going from right to left.
And I think just key thing to emphasize here, so this data isn't about the landscape. This is the data about MarTech stacks, that we've surveyed well over 1,000 different MarTech stacks over this 7-year period. And so what you're seeing there with the blue is in every stack, how many products do they have from the head, the red, how many from the torso, the yellow, how many from that long tail. And exactly as you're saying, Frans, what is amazing is, over these 7 years, everyone's been talking about the consolidation. And it does happen. You do see this upward pull, of functionality into head and torso products. But then right behind it, there's this consistent renewal of new capabilities in the long tail that aren't just being produced out in the market. They're being adopted inside people's stacks. Pretty crazy stuff.
Pretty crazy stuff. And more to that in the composability part of our research, where we explain what the dynamic is and why this is happening. Let's move on for now, because, there's always these, when you do these validations, it's so telling. Again, I told you, try a couple of tools on MarTech Map and you will learn a lot. This is some of the fun stuff we learned and we wanted to share with you. So there are detectors if people write text on Twitter and see if it's written by AI. How cool is that? So you can detect that. But then there are also tools that bypass that detection. Well, at least they say they do. And some are so convinced, they say it's 100% undetectable. I mean, I would say game on, Scott. This is the battle of the GenAI with each other.
It used to be like the virus and the antivirus software. Yeah, now it's the AI and the anti-AI powered by AI. Yeah, now it's interesting times we live in.
Yeah, and it's very easy to lose track of all this. So I would say experiment and maybe use a tool to collaborate and do your to-do list and remember everything, or organize nothing, or maybe forget nothing, or summarize anything. And now I'm completely confused. But I like these headlines, how they're working out. But I don't know what I should do. Should I organize nothing? Crazy. Well, talking about organization, why not put an app on your inbox and personalize that into a daily podcast. And the first time I read this, I was like, that's not making sense. You know, sometimes you have phishing mail going like, I'm your mother. Can you just wire $10,000 to me because I'm running out of milk? And you go like, oh, that's interesting. You don't want to hear that on the podcast, but the subtitle really triggered me. It says, why not put all your newsletters, your favorite newsletter, into a daily podcast while walking outside or in the park, in a break? I mean, how cool is that? Would you use that, Scott? I like the tool.
Yeah, it's fascinating. We've seen a bunch of, these content AI marketing tools for marketers this past year, like the capability to let marketers remix content in different ways, much more quickly. This is wild when you recognize, like, we're going to increasingly see power in the hands of the audience to be able to remix things the way they each want as well, too. Now, that's personalization.
Right there.
Well, listen, I know we've talked a lot here about the supply side of MarTech, which is continuing to grow. We want to share some data from a couple SaaS management platform companies who really look at the demand side of the adoption of SaaS subscriptions in tech stacks. So these SaaS management platforms, they connect into your entire tech stack. They analyze and audit all the different tools that you're actually subscribed to, which is always amazing for people when they like get the real number of like, wait, I only thought I had 2 or 3 tools. And it's like, no, you have 200 or 300, and then these companies very generously aggregate that data across all of their customers and publish these as empirical data stats of the size of tech stacks. So one of them, Xylo, this is some data. The blue bars are from 2023. The orange bars are from their latest 2024 report. And you can see for different size companies, yes, the size of tech stacks has shrunk. People did expect some of that to happen in the financial austerity of 2023, but they didn't shrink by a tremendous amount. I mean, a little bit different, depending on company size, but on average around 10%. Like you take companies with 500 to 2,500 employees, and okay, they went from having on average 255 SaaS subscriptions to 245, which again, we're all fans of rationalizing. Get rid of tools that you aren't using, get rid of tools that are duplicating things in a way that you don't find useful. But boy, there is a lot of useful stuff out there. And the thing about the Xylo data is they also, shared like, okay, and by the way, this is the frequency which new tools keep entering the stack. So like, for instance, that 500 to 2,500 segment, on average, 6 new SaaS subscriptions get added every 30 days. Now, the reason the total number doesn't keep growing is because people are getting rid of older apps that they aren't using at the same time that they're experimenting with new ones, and that goes back to the graph you were sharing there, Frans, of like just this consistency of the long tail in tech stacks remains persistent over time. Another SaaS management company, Productive, also just recently published their stats comparing on the bottom here, you see the data from 2022. The bubbles on the top are their latest data from full year 2023. And again, you can see red, yellow, blue is small, medium, large businesses. Again, about 10% shrinkage, in the total number of SaaS subscriptions. But you still end up in a place where medium-sized companies have, on average, 314 SaaS subscriptions. So this is probably a really good segue for us to then share with you some of the data here from the MarTech Composability Survey that we ran earlier this year. Huge thank you to all the MarTech and marketing operations professionals who participated in this. And the reason we want to dig into this is because composability has become quite the buzzword, in MarTech. It's even now like categories of products. We talk about composable CDPs. We talk about composable DXPs. But Frans and I believe composability is a broader concept than any one category there. And we actually think of composability at a few different levels. There's the stack itself is a kind of composed capability. You bring multiple products together, and the way you integrate them and use them together, it's a composed stack. Within that stack, you might have particular platforms like a composable CDP that specializes in letting you compose different data sources together into that platform. And then as you're using these different tools, right, ultimately what we as marketers are doing are creating composed experiences, composed apps, composed workflows that bring multiple things together. And this concept of composability, I mean, it might sound sort of techy, but the truth is this is just throughout the entire world of software and computers. It has been for 40, 50 years. When we think about how software developers build software, right? Nobody does this completely from scratch. They build software by taking libraries of different pre-built functionality or using APIs from the cloud, and they compose a new application and then provide custom capabilities on top of that foundation. On the non-technical side, you could even argue things like spreadsheets that I know all of us, have used for a long time, for better and worse. Right? What does a spreadsheet do? It lets you compose different pieces of data that you bring together in one environment where you can then manipulate and essentially create something new value from those different inputs. And by the way, one of the things that's exciting here about AI is, in this graph, by the way, if you haven't seen this before, it's in that Martech for 2024 report we published back in December. But, we looked at this from some composability is more technical in nature, some less technical. Some is more about composing data. Some is more about composing services and functionality. But like all of these different spots on that continuum are largely shifting to the right from, requiring more technical expertise to now with AI requiring less technical expertise to be able to leverage that composability. Also in that Martech for 2024 report, we talked a bit about Clay Christensen's model of disruptive innovation and how a lot of these AI tools that are helping to take previously technical capabilities and empower non-technical users to self-serve some of those capabilities. For the most part, they're starting out serving these low-end use cases. They're cases that, quite frankly, you didn't want, like a dedicated software engineer or data analyst to work on because it was a smaller, particular little workflow I wanted to build or, particular data question I wanted to answer. It's really exciting to see AI, starting to help address that underserved category. Anyway, I'm sure we'll be talking more about that. Let's dive into the data here from the composability survey. So first of all, we were asking people about a variety of different kinds of platforms in the MarTech stack, how many were out there. And again, if you ask a bunch of marketing tech, marketing ops people, it's probably not surprising. Marketing automation platforms and customer engagement platforms are the most popular. But you can see there's quite a spectrum of different kinds of platforms, from like CRMs, from DXPs, cloud data warehouses, CDPs, and stacks are very often made up of multiple platforms. But as you think about a stack, increasingly it's about where's the center of gravity in that stack. So we asked people that they could choose one and only one answer of what out of those tools did they consider to be the center of their MarTech stack for marketing operations. You will dive into some of the slices of this, but you can see most of the time it's a combination of either like the CRM, most commonly, or the marketing automation, customer engagement platform, or a CDP, and then starting to rise here, cloud data warehouses. But one of the surprises we found in this, was we certainly gave people the option to say, oh, we use a multi-product suite that we consider to be the center of our stack. And don't get me wrong, actually, a lot of people, probably most of the people answered this, they have a multi-product suite in their stack, but they didn't think of the suite as being the center. They tended to think of one of the products or components within that suite as the thing that was the center. It was either the CRM or the map or the CDP. And so even in where people have adopted multi-product suites, they're actually thinking about them in a more composable way. So we did want to break this out, B2B versus B2C, because there is differences here. B2B more commonly use a CRM or a marketing automation platform as that center of gravity for their stack. In B2C, it's more common to see the CDPs or increasingly now the cloud data warehouses, CDWs. What an alphabet soup, right? We got B2B, CRM, MA, MAP, B2C, CDP, CDW. All right, are you keeping track of all this stuff at home? So what makes a product the center of a stack? Well, quite frankly, if the majority of things in your stack are integrating to it, that is, in a very definitional way, the center of the stack. And it was great to see that when people identified a product that they thought of as the center of their stack, that 72% of them said, yes, indeed, we have the majority, more than 50% of the other products in our stack integrated with it. Now, this leads to another interesting and was somewhat surprising finding for us. Is okay, so we know most people, like when they have these products at the center of their stack, these platforms tend to have a lot of different functionalities and a lot of different modules, or additional products that are available to them. But we've seen over time that people tend to also have specialist tools that, if you were to look at it from a distance, you'd say, well, like, why are you using this tool? Because, don't you have that functionality in the platform at the center of your stack? And it turns out, a lot of people have these tools that at some level say they're doing the same thing. And we'll get into some of the differences in a moment. But 82.7% folks say, no, we either have a few cases or many cases where we've explicitly chosen to use a different product to substitute a particular capability. And so this really was a surprise. Sometimes when people talk about wait, you have duplicate functionality in your stack, that must be a mistake, that must be an error. And don't get me wrong, there probably are cases where it is a mistake and an error too, but there are also clearly cases where no, this was intentional. It was an intentional design. So why are people doing this? Curious minds wanted to know. And so we gave people a choice of, okay, why do you choose to do that? Is it for better functionality? Is it because, could it be less expensive? Could it be a better user experience? Could it be easier to govern and control? And first of all, again, just sort of emphasizing, people do this by design. 2/3 of the respondents say no, we explicitly chose this because the particular way it does the functionality we need, it's actually better at that, than the tool that might have that capability, but doesn't have it the way we want it, or it doesn't serve the more advanced use cases we want. So again, people are making conscious choices there.
Yeah, this is what we define also in the report, that you cannot have, as a center platform, be everything to everyone. So you probably offer this functionality, but not as in-depth as, for instance, the specialist apps. And maybe you want to try them first before you move over to really purchasing it or configuring it, if you have purchased it already. And that's a fascinating thing. And I think this is at the very core, of what we are doing at marketing, experimenting a lot, trying out new things, and because we have to surprise and delight the customer. So that translate into how we work with a Martech stack. And I think center platforms have a breadth of functionality, whereas these tools sometimes have the depth for a certain use case you want to try out first. So this actually makes sense.
Yeah, and that leads into what was a truly counterintuitive finding for us, which is we were surprised that, 1/3 of the respondents said we choose these alternative apps because it's actually cheaper. And you're like, well, wait a second, you're duplicating functionality in your stack and somehow that's cheaper. How can that be? And it's like, you really have to peel back, the covers to understand that, okay, well, sometimes like the particular module that a, given platform might have might be more expensive, might have more capabilities than you actually need. You need something, much smaller, and you get a specialist. We used to call them point solution, a specialist product, that just does that and does it for less money. We've got the cases here of, increasingly there's usage-based pricing across different MarTech tools. And so depending on, again, your particular use cases and what you need, there might be an alternative that the usage pricing is less expensive. And even to your point, Frans, this idea of experimentation, sometimes it's just easier, cheaper, for people to try experimenting something in a small way with an independent tool. And then if it's working, if it's scaling, maybe they look to pull that into their primary platform. But anyways, the CFO who would say yeah, just get rid of SaaS subscriptions, that's how we save money. You need to temper that by there might actually be a few SaaS subscriptions that are actually helping save you money. So another somewhat counterintuitive surprise was that, again, around a third of these marketers were saying, we choose these alternative apps because for that particular use case, we find it a better user experience. And again, this kind of makes sense once you start to think about it, that a specialist tool, that its entire, reason for existence is to serve a particular use case, can really optimize their entire experience for that. So people make those choices. And then the last one that was also, again, like a pretty counterintuitive finding is we've normally said, like, okay, well, if you have fewer tools in your stack, that's going to be easier to govern. But again, almost a third of marketers said, actually, we do have cases where we find it, that easier to govern or gives us better control to actually have a dedicated tool for a particular capability. Again, if you start to think about this, you're like, okay, particularly if it's a tool that's only going to be used by a particular team for a particular function, not having to manage that within a much larger platform actually can be more of a controlled sandbox environment. So I don't know, you add these all up and it's like, okay, yes, other things being equal, you want to rationalize your MarTech stack, and like Occam's razor, right? The smallest stack is generally best. But you have to be careful here that there are other factors where, we may choose particular alternative apps in our stack for better functionality, better economics, better user experience, or better governance.
And here what you see is, it's a different agenda and the different dynamics you see in IT. They want to make sure that it's predictable and it's maintainable. Whereas we as marketers, we need to experiment a lot. We need to do rapid prototyping. So imagine, and it all comes together, if you want to try something new, you overhaul your center platform, and after 9 months of implementation, configuration, and all the costs spent, and maybe affecting core customer journeys, so it's also harder to govern afterwards, you have a platform where you say, that doesn't work, let's skip it. And then IT goes like, what are you doing? So rather try out and create a space in your stack where you allow for experimentation. We spoke about hack, pack, and stack. Allow for experimentation. And once it's really mature and when you have traction and you drive revenue, incorporate it into your central platform. That could be a very good approach. And I think we didn't say it yet, but composability is not a strategy, it's a reality. But this experimentation and rapid prototyping is a strategy, and embrace it, because it will free up the creativity of marketers, and it will create also the stability you want to have in your IT department and your IT environment.
Indeed. So in the report, we actually go into some deeper analysis of this as well, because again, we found these findings so counterintuitive to conventional wisdom. We did take a look at people who tend to do more substitution of alternative apps versus those who only do it for a few. And these dynamics played out even further. The more that people are using these alternative apps, generally, the more alignment they find with getting better functionality, better economics, better user experience, better governance. So the next thing you would sort of wonder here is okay, well, how easy or hard is it for people to do this composition? And here the data is mixed. It's less than half who said it was either moderately easy or very easy, and just a little more than half who said, okay, this is either moderately difficult or very difficult. Or again, there are cases where people aren't doing this. And we dug a little bit further into that again, too, of okay, well, for those who do a lot of this, do they find it easier? And the answer is yes. Now, again, this is a correlation. The more substitutions we do, generally the easier we find it. Maybe practice makes perfect. Maybe the choices they've made in their platform at the center of the stack to have a more open platform to facilitate that, is one of the ways that do that. But it's actually encouraging to see that, again, people who are embracing this composability are generally finding it easier than those who, only do it to a little bit. We also took a look at understanding when people are doing a lot of these substitutions versus just a few, what tends to be the center of their stack that they do this. And the folks who are doing more of it tend to think of their CRM as the center of their stack. And one of the possible explanations for this that Frans and I have discussed is, a CRM isn't just a marketing tool, right? It tends to be a center of gravity that's used across marketing, sales, customer service. And as a result, you actually have a much broader set of use cases, hence possibly more specialist apps that you want to plug in. So perhaps that's one way of looking at it. Those who do it fewer tended to be more marketing oriented. You start to see more of a presence around a marketing automation or customer engagement platform at the center, or even a CDP. Now, getting into the mechanics of how this happens, this composability happens through APIs. And so it's probably not surprising, although the magnitude was surprising, of asking people how important APIs were when they were evaluating a new MarTech product. And 83.9%, almost 84%, said it's either important or very important. And that last group, 51.2%, the majority of these respondents said APIs are one of the top 3 criteria. It's incredibly important for them, when they're choosing new products, which makes sense because this is the gateway to composability. Now, as we ask people, say, okay, well, think of those products at the center of your stack, how good are they at providing the APIs you want? And here, there's room for improvement, about 17-18% said, yeah, no, the platform we have at the center of our stack has great API coverage. Another 47-48% said, it's got good coverage. And then it starts to, degrade from there. We would just humbly suggest to those MarTech vendors who happen to be tuning in today or watching this on demand, when 51.2%, that previous slide of your customers say APIs are very important. It's like a top 3 criteria in selection, for products. But only 17.3% of you, on average, must be great at this. This is an opportunity. There is a gap here that is waiting to be closed.
I think that's a free advice, right, for a competitive advantage. Maybe they should have something like a head of platforms.
All right. So do you automate work? Like, what do people do, with this composability? And we want to dig into that a bit as well. One is, do you automate workflows across multiple tools in your MarTech stack? And not surprisingly, yes, 87% do. Some of the data in the report looks at are they using that platform at the center of their stack to do that orchestration? Or are they using a dedicated iPaaS or workflow automation tool? Or are they doing both, which is actually the case in for a lot of stacks? We took a look at things like, do you integrate these tools in your stack to internal communications tools such as Microsoft Teams or Slack? And the answer for the majority is yes. In fact, for 26-27%, actually, they have a lot of things throughout their stack that they tend to integrate into those tools, sort of as an aggregated way of handling notifications and live communication. We also even dug into some analysis of people building custom apps, because very often custom apps become one way in which people are composing creations inside their stack. And again, the majority of you are. It's interesting, though, to look, some are building these in that center platform. Some are building them with a dedicated no-code or low-code tool. Some are building them in professional development environments. And these are not necessarily mutually exclusive. So more data in the report on that. But the last thing we want to share from this survey is there's been a lot of talk over these past couple of years about this shift to cloud data warehouses, cloud data lakes as kind of a universal data layer connecting the MarTech stack. And of course, we had to ask, and it is true. 70% of the respondents here said, yes, they are integrating their MarTech stack to a data warehouse or data lake. In some cases, they're doing this one way, pushing data from MarTech apps into the warehouse, or the other way of taking data from the warehouse and rehydrating it into their frontline apps and operations. But in the vast majority, 47%, they're doing it bidirectionally. This is a really exciting evolution. Again, when we ask people to say, okay, well, if you're using a cloud data warehouse in your stack, like what percentage of the rest of the tools in your stack are connected to it? And the green and yellow here, you see the majority is, what's the total number on that? About 60, percent have more than 50% of their MarTech stack integrated to that data layer. So we'll just close this out by like referencing back. We had an ulterior motive in the way we worded some of these, questions. Is back in our MarTech for 2024 report in December, we presented this model of aggregation with a nod to Ben Thompson of Stratechery, that it isn't just about consolidating, like reducing the number of apps in your stack to a very small number. I mean, this rationalization is good, but massive consolidation just hasn't happened. But rather to think about aggregation and this ability to have tools that help make it easier for you to get coherence and manage having multiple tools, multiple composed components within your stack. And that might be at the data layer or the workflow layer or the user experience or even the governance. And in our report back in December, we gave a whole bunch of examples of, okay, these are different kinds of tools that are actually delivering on that aggregation. Cloud data warehouses being one great example at the data layer. And so when you go back and you map the results from this composability survey, you actually see that, yes, people are doing these aggregation platforms, with UI aggregation, 64.9%, workflow aggregation, 70.1%. In fact, I think that's a typo of mine here. It's actually closer to 87%, are doing some form of workflow aggregation. And then data aggregation through a data warehouse at over 70% as well, too. So it is a composable world. We are just living in it. But Frans, how does this translate into actually making money?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, right? Because let's say with all this data, all the insights you just shared, we can say, okay, cool. We have composable stacks. It's a reality. It's happening. You have center platforms, and then you have other tools around it, and you migrate some of the successful features and use cases. Cool. But how do we do that? How do we start? And the simple answer is always, you have to create value. And business value means value for the customer and value for the company. So it has to be good for company, good for customer. And good for company means mostly saving money, and good for customer means making money. And that's how we try to figure out for the past almost 3 to 5 years, Scott. We've been working with people to figure out, okay, how can we translate MarTech stacks and business value and link them to each other? Because we see in the market so many of these reports showing up. It failed, it's not good. And always we get these questions like, yeah, is this tool the best in class? And I always answer, I don't know. What is it you're trying to solve? Mm-hmm. So we looked into our data and tried to figure out what is actually happening here. So the Harvard Business Review said something, you have to rethink your CRM and focus on increased revenue. And you have to figure out how to do that. So how do we link somehow revenue with MarTech stacks or the different types of elements in your stack? And we came up with a calculation or a metric or an equation, whatever you want to call it. We first want to understand, how does the internal performance work? How are we doing internally? And the capability maturity model from the Carnegie Mellon University, you've seen it many times, we shared it before, is a great one, because it basically says, very simply put, you cannot automate what you haven't standardized, and you cannot standardize what you haven't defined. We can go into this in depth and do a separate hour on that. For now, this is it. You can see where you are, and these are self-reported numbers. We'll come to that in a second. But then you know how you work and how you function internally and perform. What if we also know how we perform in the market, how we are competing, how we are compared to other companies, external performance? And a very good metric there is company revenue per employee ratio. Not because we say so, because many people say, okay, that's a very good industry benchmark. And that is very important. We learned with our research, looking at all those stacks, and we have like 1,100 where we have the revenue per employee ratio indicated, pulled from annual reports and what have you. Yes, a lot of work. What we did, and there is figuring out, does it say something? And we see big differences across industries. Also business models like B2B, B2C, but especially industries. Now, how great would it be if we can connect internal performance with external performance? So if you up your game on the internal side, does it also up your revenue on the external side? How great would that be? And that is basically a correlation. And correlation, Scott said earlier, for another graph, is not causation. But it gives you a direction of, hey, more of this is showing up in higher ranking companies, and the opposite can also be true. So it's a correlation that ranks from -1 to 0 being a neutral, no correlation, to +1. And this gives us a direction and a feel to, okay, internal performance, because that's what we're supporting with our tooling in Martech. How does that impact the rest? One of the big surprises was when we looked into what are the top 30% ranking companies doing. And we're looking at revenue per employee ratio, just that, not maturity. And we looked at, okay, what are the top 30 and how is their maturity in the industry on average? And if you look at it, you see that the outperformers rank and rate their own maturity lower. And we were like flustered, like, how can this be? What is the sense in it? Until we, of course, and you've seen our work on the hype cycle before, we took the Dunning-Kruger effect and curve into equation. And then we were like, oh, it makes a lot of sense. You know, in the beginning, you think it's not that complex. You can implement this new software, and then you bump your nose into a brick wall and you go like, oh, wait, hold on. I'm not as mature as I thought I was, the low 70%. Maybe I should look into different aspects of it and then up my game. So that was really an eye-opener. Cognitive bias is in action. So we tend to overestimate new technology, not only in the market, but also in our company or maybe in our team. Then we looked at, okay, we're talking about these failures in CRM. So let's take that one. CRM, there's that block in the big super graphic, and there are 49 other ones. We just took, I think, a dozen here, and we looked into that and said, okay, CRM, how is it doing in banking? Because there are differences by industry. And in banking, it shows a negative correlation on both ends. And hold your horses, don't switch off your CRM if you're in banking, financial services, insurance. Please don't. There's more to it. There's a more nuanced story to that. But it does mean you have to be kind of careful. And we'll explain careful in the next slide. But you see there are two negative correlations. You also see two positive correlations with a green arrow pointing to the right. And you see the combination. Actually, the four options here. And that you see here, we put them in a quadrant. You can study later. But the short version is basically you have by industry certain MarTech that is a high flyer. So CRM across the board, not necessarily, is a negative satisfier, as you see here. And a negative satisfier means you need to have it, but please don't over-engineer. And that is the secret. Now we understand why certain CRM is failing in which situations, and or at least give an impression and a direction. Because 73% of the outperformers are using a CRM. They didn't switch it off. They're just very careful and they keep it to a minimum. And then, like we saw in the composability results, maybe have more integrations. Cool. If that's the game in banking, then that's the game. And you see more combinations and some of our advice. But if we move to the next slide, you see very clearly by industry that CRM plays a different role. And that was a big surprise. It's not like, oh, switch on CRM and you're golden. No, you have to be aware in which industry are we, what are we trying to do. If you're in consumer products, it's a pretty straightforward thing, most likely. In other ones, you have to be careful, or you have to make sure you start small and then start growing. And those are the four options we saw. And that brings us to the $1 million question, right? To invest or to divest? That's the question. I think it was Shakespeare, if I'm not mistaken. But you remember that we said 2 years ago, flatten the MarTech hype cycle, right? You don't want to overinvest, don't want to divest, you don't want to reinvest. You want to stay within those green lines and flatten the curve. And yeah, it looks like we have found something where we can at least see which areas you should be careful and where you can invest. because that's what you want to see. So let's take all 49 categories, and we highlighted CRM again here, our friend from the beginning. And then you want to understand, okay, how does this work? Now, remember we spoke about the correlation between revenue per employee and your internal maturity. If there is a positive correlation, what you see is the green line there is showing on the outside of the red circle. The red circle represents the 0. So if you go inside that circle, it's a negative correlation. And that brings us to a very simple overview, like, okay, this green zone is most likely the core stack of the outperformers. It's an accumulation, so please don't copy and paste. You're unique and you're special, but not in everything. So make sure in the green zone, you are representing some of your tools. And in the red zone, it's maybe to consider to divest. And maybe it's also good to look at what outperformers are doing. So they grow, of course, a lot of maturity, but they don't. They're careful in the different areas. And they get it wrong sometimes too. If you look at it, they show negative correlations, but because they don't have the numbers, they don't always know. So funny enough, you can outperform the outperformers. And the low performers is what you see here. They're a bit more represented on the left-hand side. No surprise. And the beauty is, of course, you can look at one individual stack and see how the maturity is there. And this one is on the right side, literally and figuratively. But you also can see there's some in the red zone, and maybe we take that money and reinvest it in a CRM because they don't have it. That is a very interesting overview, I would say, of how to approach a composable stack pointing at business value, good for company and good for customer. I would almost say this is already a lot, but Scott, is this it? All we want to share?
Whew. Well, of course, I mean, it's Martech Day, but wait, there's more. So we are going to wrap up this first session here on the Keynote. You can get a copy of the full State of Martech report, the latest 2024 Martech landscape. But grab a quick water, bathroom break, and then come join us here for the next 5 sessions that Frans and I are going to be interviewing SaaS and digital alchemy around marketing in the data supply chain. We're going to have an interview with WordPress VIP around adaptability and composability in MarTech stacks. An interview with Growth Loop on creative campaigns from cloud data. An interview with Syncery on the data warehouse isn't the be-all and end-all. And with MoEngage about advancing cross-channel marketing with AI and data. These are not sales presentations. These are Frans and I engaging with the leaders and the experts of these companies here on really their deep knowledge and customer experiences that they have to share of how people are getting this stuff done. And then, of course, after that, we're going to close out today's adventures with the 2024 Stacky Awards. Very excited to share 26 illustrated marketing technology stacks. So you won't want to miss that at the close of the day. But for now, we will say thank you. Thank you to our sponsors, Growth Loop, MoEngage, SaaS, Syncery, WordPress VIP, the wonderful people at Goldcast for this platform, our good friends at G2 and Clearbit for data analysis. And of course, again, a thank you to all of you.
Thank you so much, and see you around. Happy Martech Day.
All right, we'll see you in a bit.